All right. Well, next we're going to have our keynote, Sunny Elebua. He is the Senior Vice President and Chief Strategy Officer, and he also leads sustainability initiatives with Exelon. We're going to have him join us up front here. Jason, I'm coming over to you. See if there's anything you wanted to add. You're good? All right. Coming up for a front row. Please join me in welcoming Sunny. Welcome. Great to have you with us. Yeah. Just in reading through a bit of your background and experience here, you've really been on the forefront of delivering on bold and needed visions for an extraordinarily large utility of utilities. So very grateful to have you here to provide your perspective on vision on some things that are critical to this discussion. Just to share with you some of the desired outcomes from the audience here was finding ways to create synergy through breaking through silos, to get to action and accountability, and finding ways to really understand what are the true needs for a utility of utilities like Exelon to be able to provide best contribution for your efforts. So that gives you maybe a context for where the audience is. And from there, I'll hand it over to you.
Well, thank you for having me. I see there's a podium here. I'll use it as a crutch. um, it's so great to be here. And more importantly, it's such a huge honor to represent Exelon and to welcome you to Chicago. We are a large T&D utility, and one of our 6 operating companies is Commonwealth Edison, ComEd, and you're basically in our territory. So thanks for being here. Thanks for being part of the program. It was so great just standing in the back of the room and, just listening to the previous conversation. I'm here to talk about our journey in the energy transition. I know, there's been a lot of conversations here, and before we even get into it, part of the reason why we're talking about the energy transition is anyone who was here 2 days ago knows the impact of what we just witnessed in terms of like the storm. And it's not just a one-off event; it's becoming more frequent. And even more importantly, like you get up and you get like 100-degree days in the morning, and then in the evening is followed by a storm. So the weather patterns are becoming a little bit unpredictable. But we're not focused on like just thinking through that. We're focused more on like what is the long-term play. Exelon is the parent company for 6 utilities. Commonwealth Edison here, Pico in Philadelphia, Atlantic City Electric in New Jersey, Delmarva Power and Light in Delaware and coastal Maryland, Baltimore Gas and Electric, and Pepco Holdings. Now, we serve about 10.5 million customers. We provide them with electric and, and gas as our energy sources. And we've done so for a lot of years. The energy transition, we have our views on it. And our views are somewhat united with everything that we've heard in this room. I mean, I joke about it that our pillars around this energy transition such that I've actually tattooed it behind my eyelids so that when I sleep at night, I can actually see it. It's all about cleaning up the energy grid, utilizing that energy to drive economic processes, minimizing wastage, and then for areas that you couldn't electrify, find clean fuels to do that. Now, the panel before us talked a little bit about hydrogen and the impact and everything it could do for us in terms of like advancing a decarbonized energy system. We're all in support of that. That's exactly what Exelon is about. But we realize, and this is a 15-minute keynote, so I'm going to keep it real short. We realize that the energy transition itself is already underway. We have to deal with the physical effects of climate change, as we just talked about, which is pretty much our adaptation pathway. We also have to deal with what I call mitigating some of that, which is essentially reducing greenhouse gases in the air. So we have commitments to do that. We work with our jurisdictions to ensure that we do so in the best interest of our customers and our communities. The biggest challenge for us right now in the energy transition is what we've all been talking about here today. We're managing trends that are somewhat reinforcing each other with really powerful feedback loops. We have huge shifts in demand and we have huge shifts in supply. and the utility is pretty much at the center of it all. Pick any trend. We've talked about generative AI. You know, Dwayne just talked about, uh, you know, building hydrogen and utilizing clean grid. All of that is great. What that tends to do is it increases load. And as that load increases, essentially you have to meet that load with building new resources. Before that, we talked about broken signals in the marketplace, which means you have problem with generation coming on stream. So you have to manage how generation is built to serve the load. And when generation is not possible, you have to think about transmission solutions. So you have to think about transmission. Now, as you build more generation and transmission to serve this load, you start figuring out that you have challenges around resource adequacy. How do you ensure that you have enough demand to match supply? That is where you start thinking about fixing the markets, because the market signals need to be such that you can actually figure out what resources to call upon and when to call upon them. Now, the load we're talking about comes in different forms. There are different ways customers use energy now. There's some who use it 24/7, flat out, they run with it. Like, data center load is completely different from someone who buys an electric vehicle. So as this customer usage profiles shift, you're also seeing a shift in the forms of generation that are coming on with intermittent renewables. How do you match the demand with the supply? Now, those questions become even more important because, in addition to solving for what we just witnessed, the resilience factor, you have to deal with the reliability. The example also talked about Houston, where doctors were saying this was a critical event. As you move more of the economy to the backs of the electric sector, you realize that people use energy differently. And because of that, the cost of interruption becomes even more magnified, whether it's in terms of like lives or commercial activities that have been impacted. So managing demand and supply becomes a very crucial factor. And that is the role that we've been asked to play as a utility, a pure play T&D utility. We sit in the middle of these factors. We have to think about the grid aspect of it. The grid part of it means we have to have a flexible, reliable, no, let me start with flexible, agile, and well utilized grid that is capable of integrating some of these new technologies we're talking about. I've talked about like this demand supply mismatch. Well, you got to incorporate new resources, be the DERs, be the long duration energy storage, behind the meter, in front of the meter. You need to be able to incorporate that. For that, you need flexible grid. In addition to that, you need a resilient grid because as you begin to build the economy on the backs of the electric sector, like I said, the cost of interruption becomes a little bit higher. So you need to ensure that beyond just like, you know, physical reinforcement, you're thinking about ways that you can actually optimize the use of the grid for everyone's benefit. But that is just one half of the equation in this energy transition. The biggest half of the equation is none of this happens without customer uptake. You can legislate your way to it. You can try to push it as hard as you can. But if customers don't adopt the technology, if there's no change in the behavioral patterns of how people use energy, it just sits there and becomes another investment that has been made without the right outcomes. So, for the customer perspective, it's super important that you think about what is important to the customer. It's not just the provision of the service, it's how it is used, it's the education, it's the economics around it, how you design rates. But above all, it's the affordability and the equity of it. And the affordability piece, now everyone tries to minimize it. Well, not minimize, or we try to talk about it with just dollars. What is my energy bill? That's great. I think that's a good measure of it. But I always try to challenge people with what is the alternative if you don't have electricity, and what would you pay for that alternative? That comes back to the value discussion. So when we talk about affordability, yes, there's affordability that's driven by energy prices, but there's an affordability that has a lot more to do with the cost of the alternative. Inaction has a consequence. When we talk about not reinforcing the grid and critical events happen, lives are lost. How do you quantify that? And I do think that the affordability discussion needs to move away from just looking at the sticker shock and think about what will be the cost of inaction. And as you think about it, it has to be about equity too. We've talked about resilience at different parts of the system, but the truth is, nobody should be left behind. But not even that, the benefits and the costs associated with the energy transition needs to be one that it is equitably distributed. And there are multiple forms of equity. I don't just mean cost of it, I mean the representation in decision making. Communities need to be carried along. I mean, like the structural pieces of equity where we're thinking about not just the allocation of cost, but the attributes invested. All of this means the role of the utility in the energy transition becomes more and more complex. And that is the role that we've been asked to play. Now, under normal circumstances, I have a short time left. I will tell you all the great things that we're doing. But I also know you're going to hear from members of my family, from ComEd here. They'll talk to you a lot more about what ComEd is doing, both on the customer front, on the grid front, and how we're engaging our communities. We know for a fact that in as much as we understand the pillars of the energy transition, clean grid, clean fuels, energy efficiency, and for the most part, advancing electrification, as much as we know that it comes and only becomes powerful if society is involved. The energy transition has the potential to create massive amounts of wealth for the communities that we serve. It has the opportunity to unlock new value streams for the customers that we serve. The wealth creation is not just the fact that we're thinking about ways in which we can attract physical infrastructure dollars. It's also about the fact that a change in the quality of life and the wellness of the people and the reskilling that happens with the energy transition has the potential to basically help some of our underserved communities build generational wealth. And we know that. And we're so hyper focused on that. And you'll hear the folks at ComEd talk about everything that they're doing to identify and especially serve disadvantaged communities. So for us at Exelon, in summary, as we think about our energy transition journey, there's some things that we know are super important to us. Point number one is we must preserve the integrity of the grid. It involves how we invest, where we invest, and more importantly, how we link our investment to outcomes, because that's why our regulators are with us. They basically say, hey, this is what we want to achieve. You are the vehicle to do that. Go ahead and make the investment. So preserving the integrity of the grid is point number one for us. Point number two for us is bringing the customer along. It's how we educate. It's how we advocate. It's how we design our social programs. It's how we design our rate structures. It's how we ensure that we think about equity and affordability in the investments that we make and how we drive prudence in all our decision making. That's point number two. Point number three is our customers make up the community. We want to build vibrant communities. Vibrant communities mean we invest in the communities we serve. Investing is not just about giving people electricity, it's about changing how they live. We have workforce development programs. We have the opportunities to change the lives of our workers. When a pandemic hit, we were first in line. We were still going into homes. We were advocating for programs that gave relief to customers financially. We were making investments in minority-owned and businesses because we understand small businesses are the backbones of our community. We're doing all of this because we understand that beyond building a resilient grid, you have to build a resilient community, a community that is able to bounce back, whether it's a pandemic, economic recession, social disturbance, whatever it is, our communities must bounce back. And the fourth aspect of what's important to us is we must all do it together. I know we all represent different sectors here. I say different sectors. When I think about like what it will take to accomplish decarbonization, everyone's looking at it from their lens. There's some who are like generators, there's some in transmission, there's some who are customer advocates, there's some who are regulators. We can't do this on our own. Collaboration and partnership is super important for us. And that's why we are working really closely with our regulators to ensure that they know what we're trying to accomplish and that the provision of this service, this public good, doesn't have any unintended consequences for those who cannot make that decision themselves. And with that, I wish I had slides to share with you. I know I've said a lot. I'm more than happy to spend a minute chatting. I don't think that's what the program calls for. But I want to thank you for giving me your audience today, and I really look forward to interacting with you all in some form. Thank you.
All right. Do we have any questions? Comments? All right. I'll come around this way. You see some? Oh, there you are. Hello. Just if you would introduce yourself, please.
Hi, my name's Lindsay Todd, and I'm with Salesforce, and we work with Exelon. When you talk about one of your points is bringing the customer along for the journey, there's a lot that's out of the control, with the environment and everything. How do you guys foresee communicating with your customers during these times? Because a lot of times they're understanding of the circumstances, but they just want communication, whether it's when their power is coming back on or whatever it might be. How do you guys see about going about that, especially through all these changes?
That's an excellent question. I couldn't have asked a better one for Melissa Washington, who's in the back of the room. She's a chief customer officer here at ComEd. And even more importantly, we've made significant investments in what we call our customer flight path. And it involves investing in not just technologies that help us communicate with customers, but things that provide what we consider the adequate needs for what the customer needs to understand to make the right energy choice. Um, I will basically not give more than that because I know she has a panel after this. But I do tell you this: we have made the right investments, and a lot of it has to do with like what we've done in our customer flight path. Sorry.
Thank you, Sonny.
Sure.
I'm curious, do you have any performance metrics that you find are working to align with your commitments on equity and connecting with community?
Another great question. Um, Designing equity metrics has been really difficult, I'll be honest. Now, you could talk about how funds flow and the impact, but like I said, equity comes in different forms. There's equity that has to do with what I will call like procedural equity. Pretty much how many of the community, how well is the community represented in the energy decision? There's that. Okay. There's equity that has to do with like sharing cost and benefits. So we have metrics in all of this. We're designing metrics in all of this, like in terms of community engagement, what is the protocol? How do we make decisions? Those metrics are in place. We're designing metrics around like affordability and economic burden. Those metrics have a lot more to do with like the cost allocation piece. We also have we have metrics around what we call like restorative equity, which is essentially recognizing that our action, like results, the current economic landscape is as a result of our actions in the past. So how do we ensure that we restore some of the communities to the points that they were before? So I give an example. In a city like Chicago, you move goods and services around. And as you move goods and services around, you have a road network system. The road network system was built years ago, the same way the electric system was built years ago. As a result of the road and electric system, you have zones. Zoning actually happens in terms of like trying to figure out the best ways to both induce commerce and also create lively neighborhoods. Zoning has actually resulted in us knowing where disadvantaged communities are. So in the siting of energy infrastructure, how do you manage to go back to like the unintended consequence of building out the grid is you've created impoverished communities. How do you go back to those communities and say, hey, here's how we make things just for you, which is what the whole EJ40 thing is about, making sure that we go back to some of those communities and restore them back to their, like what we'll consider a right position because of the unintended consequences of the build out of infrastructure. So we have those metrics, and those metrics guide our actions. But like with everyone, we're thinking about new metrics and all the things that we would like to do differently because the transition is one that you can't judge it with just one lens. You're solving a multivariate equation. And like I said before, some of these factors have feedback loops that reinforce each other. So essentially, solving one or looking at it in one way typically results in a suboptimal answer. So, short, we have a lot of metrics and equity, and we also have them broken down by different equity classes.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, come over here.
I always love hearing you speak. You're so like direct and clear. I'm curious.
Thank you.
I always hear like there's more the utility has to do. There's more complexity. Is there anything that you're going to stop doing as part of the clean energy transition? What are you not taking forward?
That's a question that we've thought about, and a lot of it has to do with, well, we know the actions that created the problem in the first place. One of the actions is just greenhouse gas emissions. So when you ask us, like, what are we going to stop doing? Point number one is reduce our greenhouse gases. So we have to rethink operations. So from that perspective, we have to minimize the effluent gases that get up in the atmosphere and create this problem. But that's on the what I call the mitigation pathway. The other thing that we're really focused on not doing is, we realize that this transition only happens if there's the right allocation of resources at the right timing with the right perspective. Now, if our regulators don't feel that same way, one of the things that we will stop doing is we will stop, acting in a manner that puts us at odds with our regulators. And I know we're all trying to solve the same problem. Like our regulators want us to solve the problem of affordability. They want us to make sure that customers have electricity. But, they also have to reward us for the risk that we take in building some of this infrastructure. And if you don't want to compensate for risk, it might ultimately create a disincentive. So you might end up seeing utility thinking about, well, if I'm not getting compensated for doing this, I'm going to stop doing it. And that I think is a wrong outcome, but it's a reality. It's the reality of where we are. And the final thing I think we'll probably stop doing is we will most likely stop making this about a discussion on building a business. We're going to talk about it as building a community because that to me is the biggest point that we need to make in the whole transition journey. It's all about making sure that we have everyone in the right place to succeed.
It's a very inspiring vision to have. Just maybe we'll see if there are any other questions. We still got a couple minutes here. Sunny, you also do a lot on innovation. So when you see the landscape of challenges and urgent issues to address, where do you get greatest hope or excitement for what innovation can do to solve these challenges?
Yes, thank you. Um, Innovation to me is like foundational in this. For the first time in 5 years, we actually had our Innovation Expo in person. We've always had one, and then COVID hit and we paused. And then, we had it virtually, and then we had it in person for the first time. So I'm still buzzing from that. My entire team, we put on a real good gathering, and we talked about innovation and what we could do here. Big thing about innovation for us is everyone tends to think about innovation as if it's technology only. And we want to move the mindset that is it's either high tech, low tech, no tech, it doesn't matter. Innovation is, as we've defined it, collaborative exploration of ideas with the intent of creating a solution, right? So for us, innovation is all about getting people together to think about a problem and fix it. We need innovative regulatory models. This model that we're currently using of making investment on socializing cost sometimes could create affordability challenges as we go through the energy transition. Innovation is required. We've talked about the fact that we need to use the grid differently. We need to figure out ways that we can reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Innovation is required to mature some of those technologies. Dwayne said hydrogen is expensive. Yes, it's expensive, but that's just the beginning of it. To be honest, if you think about the entire hydrogen value chain, production is expensive. Delivery is literally not yet figured out because of embrittlement issues. End use, we don't fully understand because of the same material surface challenges in terms of like when you burn hydrogen, what does it do to? So you still need investments in like material sciences as well to mature some of this technology. So you need that innovation. You need innovation in how we think about the grid, new planning tools, how we think about connecting this customer to load. We talk about shifting customer load profile. You need to think about how you plan for the grid. So innovation is basically pervasive, and we don't spend enough time talking about it. But the truth is, innovation is actually what holds everything together for us. And it's not just innovation in technology, it's innovation in all aspects of the energy value chain.
Thank you. We have one more. This is our final question, please. No pressure.
My name is Surya from Deloitte. Actually, have had the privilege to be working with Exelon alongside Matt over the many years. Especially on the customer experience side and digital side. I wanted to quickly go back to the education aspect, as you mentioned, the focus being on building that community and not a business. Uh, the challenge that I often see is that we often have to come up with answers after the fact because of the scale of disturbances, whether it's the tornadoes touching down or whether what's happening in Houston now. How are we enabling and educating our customers as we build that community, across innovation, across what's the future of the grid? How are we thinking about sustainability and inclusion going forward?
That's a really great question. Um, Customer education is complex, to be honest. The reason it is because customers, they have a wide spectrum. There are those who know a lot, know little, know nothing. Like you have to deal across that. But the biggest challenge in the customer education piece is you have to understand what the underlying reasons are for people making energy choices. And I can tell you, it's a function of information and it's a function of economics, right? I've told the story once before in a different setting. I come from Nigeria. I'm chief sustainability officer at Exelon. I keep talking about save the planet. I'm a tree hugger. I go home to my country to visit extended family. I see people cooking with firewood, right? like extended family members. I come from a small farming community. And I ask, why do you do this? Don't you understand it's bad for the planet? And they have like 3 or 4 main reasons why they do it. Reason number one is, this is all we know. The food tastes better. Reason number two is, the firewood is free. I just got it from my farm. Reason number three is, what is the alternative? And so you realize that people make energy decisions as a function of habits, whether they're in a large complex economy like the US or in a small village in like Africa. It's a function of economics. It's a function of information, tradition, habits, and it's a function of like literally what you know. So you ask me, how do we do this? We put ourselves in the customer's shoes. We say, what is your journey to an energy decision? And we try to help you in every step of the way. You want to buy an electric vehicle? I'm using that as an extreme example because that's a different affluent class, right? What would it take to charge? What is our price signals that we give in terms of our time of use rates? What does it mean to connect one in your house? Can we get you plugged into a program that allows you to get a charger? And what does it mean for like all you need to do in terms of like home modification, etc.? We make that path easier. And that to me is what it means to partner with your customers. Now, for some other customers, that's a large, huge bill to pay in terms of buying an electric vehicle. It's all about just how do I use electricity in a manner that I can optimize it. Like on a hot day like this, I know exactly that I don't have to work in my underwear because I have to turn off the air conditioning to save money. So it's all about like figuring out ways that you can make them aware of like some of the assistance programs and support programs, how they sign up for the proper, like, billing programs so that they can actually ensure that they get the best use of the grid. So it's a wide gamut, and you can't have like one solution for everybody. You just have to meet the people where they're at. I'm sorry to use a political phrase, but that's what it is. You just gotta, deal with it on a case by case basis.
Thank you.
Thank you all.